Okay, friends, this is definitely a late night spooky ball episode of my YouTube channel. If you've been following me for a while, you know I have specific themes. I also tend to stitch them together somewhat chronologically in that I'll refer to previous recent videos sometimes just to establish the chronology. And I've been talking about just recently I mentioned Wittgenstein and how he had trouble getting along with his peers in Britain, and I said maybe he didn't have much of a diary about his internal life that we could go on, but I don't think that's entirely true. I have a lot of books on Wittgenstein, and also I talked about his trying to go to Russia, and I said I didn't know much about that whole chapter and what was that all about. But I've neglected to mention this book, which I have read, and I hope it shows up here. The Jew of Linz. Okay, so this is a book that I didn't find out about really, even though I'd spent, let's see, what's the date on it? Maybe it just came out after I went to Princeton. 98. Okay, so yeah, I was long out of Princeton before this came out. Was that when it was first published? Really that recently, huh? 1998. Well, that explains it. Um, Unless there was an earlier version. I don't think so. Anyway, so this book I think is pretty important. Whether or not it is true, it tells a story in a way that makes sense to the author, and therefore I'm sure to a number of people who want to see more of a sort of political tension going on between sort of metaphysics, right? So Wittgenstein has this philosophy of language that the author of this book sees as Kimberly Cornish is the author. He sees Wittgenstein's philosophy as maybe somehow ending ownership, or it's complicated to discuss. But the thesis of the book is that Hitler and Wittgenstein went to the same school, which I think is well known. The question is, did Hitler's hatred for Wittgenstein, in particular, specifically, fuel his hatred for Jews in general? Was Wittgenstein his triggering dude? And this is a good question. I don't think it should be dismissed out of hand. So I just want mainly in this video to say, hey, I may have sounded like I didn't even know this book existed in my last video because I was raising questions about trying to go to Russia and acting like I knew nothing about it. And it hit me that, of course, I've read this book, so I do know something about it. Now, this whole time I'm showing showtimes for Midsummer, which is a disturbing horror film, and I think that's kind of the genre we might be in. Like, it's kind of horrifying if Wittgenstein really was somehow a Russian spy, the way that this author suggests, and that the war between Hitler and Judaism was somehow it was more personal than we'll ever really know, and all that. It's kind of, history would be boring if it didn't have these kind of conspiracy or different angles on things. And I think, Eastern philosophy, Buddhism, and all this, it is challenging sort of a Western cogito based, ego based, like the way we think of the self does come under scrutiny in philosophy. That's true. And we easily mix in Buddhism as really more psychological in some ways than a religion. I wrote a paper for Kaufman on that, in fact, about how the word religion, it was a book, I believe, with the title The End of Religion, which merely said that in coming to name religions and having a lot of them, it was a different view of religion. It's like all of a sudden there are these 10 major religions or whatever. In a way, that was a change in the whole idea of our relationship to divinity, to have like all these religions all of a sudden. And I think the death of God, I think what Nietzsche was charting was kind of a new relationship with the cosmos that humans are going to have now, given how the world has evolved in various ways. Bucky Fuller, he's a transcendentalist. I think we could clearly pigeonhole him that way if we wanted. And his No More Secondhand God and the way he writes is somewhat alien to, I would say, biblical Christianity. Fuller doesn't go around quoting the Bible a lot. He does talk about Noah and Tetra Scroll and so forth, but he's not trying to pigeonhole himself in any particular religion. I bring all this up because I do think that it wouldn't be surprising to, in other words, telling the story of Nazism versus Wittgenstein's philosophy somehow. I think we can always do that. But whether we should buy into a narrative that there was some kind of personal hatred between these two and that was kind of behind, not that drove the war, because you need a lot of people with there's plenty of hatred to go around, I would say. Like if it was just Hitler, the raving madman, that wouldn't have gotten anywhere. No one demagogue. They know how to set the momentum of what's in the air. Like so, you could say I believe in a zeitgeist or a shared mind. I certainly do believe in a sort of collective psychology. It's what people try to work with when they want to start a war, for example. They go after this sort of collective psyche somehow, striking matches, trying to get something going, right? So I think any politician, really, especially a major politician, knows what we're talking about when we talk about atmospherics and the group mind or groupthink, or, there is a shared aspect to mental phenomena. We could talk about that. But again, philosophy, even psychology, have always been established in this area. This is not something new. We can't give it to Wittgenstein that he was in any way, if he wrote about Schopenhauer's Ubermind or whatever, it wasn't anything super original. His original work, I think, is the Investigations. That was super original. And I don't think of Nazism as all that original, but it did have its esoterica. I'm not the super expert in any case on that. I've been studying it though. Triumph of the Will. I think my trajectory in my studies, it makes sense right now that I'm looking at this period in history and through these personalities. I think that's kind of where I've been going. So I'm cycling back through a lot of this information. I'm thinking about Ernest Hemingway. I'm thinking about the Spanish Civil War. I'm thinking about, Guernica and all that, and how the Spanish Civil War was getting off the ground here in Wittgenstein's. I think there's going to be information about that. I've read this book, but it was a while back. And rather than read the whole thing again right now, I just wanted to say I'm aware of it, and we'll talk more later.